Welcome back to the private sector. Still okay with that name, Travis?
I'm warming up to it.
All right.
Slowly.
I mean, you were the one who suggested it first, I believe.
Yeah, I'm starting to think like the dark open society, but I don't know.
Open society.
It doesn't have
that has a
the
lot
ring to it.
That has a lot of different connotations to it.
It does have, and I didn't really think that one through either. Just like the private sector.
All right, Brendan, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, Michael.
Yeah, that's right. I'm Michael, the host of this podcast. And these are my co-hosts, Travis Scholes and Brendan Fougere. Or Fougere.
Yeah.
I have no idea how to pronounce French names.
We all know that you're biased against the French.
I am. Well, that's what happens when you are a lower class of European, being a Frenchman. Remember back 150 years ago where it mattered what kind of white you were? Like Italians were looked down on and Irishmen were looked down on. Do you remember
Italians and Irishmen are some of the coolest.
Absolutely, I agree.
The coolest legacy in America. They've got some freaking crazy stuff they did.
Yeah, well, today that is not really looked upon as a feasible idea.
No, there's not a lot of white people bashing other white people for being a different type of white.
Nobody cares about an Avengers Civil War.
Exactly. No one cares.
That's really what I was trying to say. I was lost for words, but...
Right.
Well,
the reason why I bring it up is because a bunch of Italian Americans defended a Christopher Columbus statue from BLM protesters and rioters.
that's what Cuomo was saying, is that Columbus represents the Italian American accomplishments in our nation's history. So, we even got Cuomo out there defending old Columbus.
Well, yeah, Cuomo's an interesting guy. Like, the smartest move for the Democrat Party would be to throw Biden out the window and then get Cuomo in there with the superdelegates. Because he's the only one...
The smartest move would to be put Michelle Obama.
But she wouldn't want to do it.
But she wouldn't do it.
She wouldn't have it. Anyways, but there's still a lot of Black Lives Matter stuff happening these days, and
well, the reason that we can't separate different white people and we can't even separate different black people, no one talks about their specific Nigerian descent, is because the intersectional ideology demands that we be separated into such broad groups. And that's why even the LGBTQ plus community continues to grow a longer acronym, because they need their larger group. And these giant groups are bound to fail and bound to fracture. And that's happening inside the LGBTQ plus community. It's happening inside the left more largely, which has the racial justice movements, the majority of them, or at least the most extremist sides of them, that has the LGBTQ plus community and ideology more broadly in it. They're all fracturing against each other. And that's part of the major problem with the intersectional ideology, is that we're taking away so much of our individualism, the characteristics that distinguish individual people from each other, and just putting them into these broad groups, which are meaningless.
Yeah, and it's something I've really obsessed with for quite a while is the absolute obsession with identity with people. And I've thought about this since about 2016, I would say. I was a part-time student at Portland State University when I was finishing up high school. And when I was attending PSU, I was a really lost person. I didn't really believe in anything. I just kind of wanted to, do my homework and go home and play Call of Duty Black Ops, and that was a cool thing.
It is pretty great.
It's still
I mean,
great.
I mean, it was great, but Treyarch kind of ruined that industry. But anyway, I'm not going to get into the politics of that. Besides the sly comment that EA can go to hell. But when I was somebody that was pretty lost, and I was still encountering just like really ferocious people at Portland State University, and I remember me not having an opinion about an ideology that supported an identity group was actually inherently offensive and viewed as systemic racism. And I've really obsessed for that for the past 4 years, and I have a lot of mixed emotions. It's angered and saddened and just kept me up at night that I see even well-professing Christians who admit in church every day that like something that unites the body of people around us, that unites somebody who lives in the United States, who is a white middle-class male with somebody in Africa, Australia, or Japan. Something that unites all these individuals is that we're made in this common image that God has bestowed upon us. And you would think that for many Christians who support BLM, like that's good news. But I even see Christians in BLM throw that whole tidbit out the window and actually implement what is very bad news in the world, which is the only thing that really matters is your identity. And my current line of thinking has been recently that one reason I'll never join BLM is because if your identity is the most important aspect of yourself, then it does for me too. And so, if you're an African American, you live in the United States, and you believe in BLM ideology, it's within your framework to gather in your group and destroy what you see as the pre-existing power structures. But it's also within my jurisdiction as a white individual to do that too. And I don't want that.
Right.
I don't think other people want that.
And people will say, well, you're racist then, because, if they're allowed to identify with their skin color and decide to put themselves into a group that separates themselves from everybody else and tries to elevate itself, but then you also do that, you're the bad guy because you're in the majority. That's the general, consensus of a lot of people, not just on the left, but also in the center of a lot of things. And you'll even find some Republicans saying that. I grew up before a lot of this stuff happened. Like Obama was, when I was in the 7th grade, he was running for president for the first time. And before then, they kind of treated civil rights stuff as like you should be colorblind, right? Mm-hmm. So I shouldn't look at a black person and say, oh, they're black. Right, and I had several black friends growing up, both when I was 1st and 2nd grade when I was living in California, and then once I got into middle school back up here in Oregon, met a friend. But man, once a whole reason why I'm involved, why I'm involved in politics, why I want to continue to be involved in politics is because when my history teacher sat me down, right, in front of the whole class, and this was during the 2008 election, he's like, okay, here's the whiteboard, and it shows Barack Obama and John McCain. And he's like, okay, everyone, here's 3 bullet points on each candidate. Which one do you want to be president? Go. Every single person in the class, every 7th grader was like, I want Barack Obama to win because he's cool and he's hip. And wouldn't it be so awesome to have the first black president? I was like, yeah, that seems pretty cool. But I was also the kid that said, well, what about their credentials? What about their merit, right? It's like, okay, so...
Meritocracy.
I mean, yeah, totally. So John McCain was an older gentleman at that point in time. I didn't know what a Republican was or a Democrat was. I didn't know what any of this stuff meant. But I was like, John McCain has about 30 years of life experience on top of Barack Obama. He's relatively young in 2007, 2008. And I was like, okay, so I was raised to respect my elders and that there is reverence there. They have wisdom. So there's 1 point for John McCain. Also, he has more job experience. One hasn't even had 6 years as a senator. The other has been in the Senate for 20 plus years. That's 2. Barack Obama has no military experience. John McCain does. And we're currently at war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So another point to John McCain. So he's got 3 points. He's just older, wiser, has more job experience. From what the little tiny information I had, I was like, it would be super cool if we had the first black president. But I think that we should try and have a president who just has more job experience, more time, being in politics, right? Knowing nothing about politics or anything like that. Because later on in my life, I would come to disagree with John McCain all the time. But no, this is the antithesis of it all. My teacher just flat out called me a racist in front of the whole class. I had never heard that word before.
It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah. And that is the whole reason why I am involved in politics, because right after that day, I started educating myself. Every single type of, I was reading up CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, NBC. I was reading everything. I was absorbing as much information as I could. And I started to see the ugliness of politics. And all of a sudden, it was also kind of funny too when he called me a racist. I was sitting next to my black friend.
There's an absurd double standard when it comes to the leftist view of race and racism, which is that if you were to look at a black man who had committed murder and thereby attribute to all black people murderous crimes, and if you looked at a statistic that even if it was more likely that black people would be murderers than white people, and you attribute it, that's racist. And that is true, it's racist. You don't attribute the actions of someone who looks like you to you. But people who have committed crimes generations ago, who share your skin color if you are white, are indicting you, and you are guilty for their crimes. And that is the definition of racism. So to say that you can categorize one skin color and attribute to them the crimes of their whole race, but not the other, is a ridiculous double standard. And now the right gets a lot of things wrong as well. The right refuses to acknowledge that race contributes to a person's identity and to their experiences. But the left says that it is all of their identity and all of their experiences. And there's a middle ground where you're not guilty because of people of your skin color and they don't define you, but you are affected differently because of your race. You have a different cultural background because of your race. And obviously it's not universal, but there are effects, and we need to find that middle ground. But actually, before we get too far into this, I wanted to introduce ourselves here.
We already introduced ourselves.
Introduce ourselves more completely, not just our names. So let's talk about, Michael, let's start with you. What is your background in politics? What are your general interests? What are your political philosophies and philosophy more general? Why?
Well, I gave you my introduction in the sense that, like, that's how I came into politics, right? So I guess, why didn't I get dragged to the left, for example? Why didn't I be like, well, I want to prove I'm not racist, so I'm going to go with their side. I'm going to say Barack Obama is better than John McCain because he's younger and cooler and black, because, well, I think it's because I grew up, there were two sides to my upbringing. One was a very 1950s-esque, American dream sort of upbringing. and then the other side was the wild Irish rancher upbringing, both of which would be considered very right wing.
Right.
But I did most of my research on my own, and I just came to my own conclusions on my own that Barack Obama would be a disaster, and John McCain was the lesser of two evils. And I would always get really upset when John McCain would go out of his way to defend Barack Obama. Like, there are certain things, right? Like the old woman coming up saying Barack Obama is an Arab. I think John McCain did the right thing there. But there were other times where he's just like, my friend. Bernie Sanders did the same thing with Joe Biden, and that's why Joe Biden is now the Democrat nominee. My friend Joe Biden. Sorry, but
right before you roasted him.
Actually, a very good impression of him, by the way.
Thank you very much. Bernie Sanders is here on the podcast.
Oh no.
That would be scary. So yeah, I just generally became this sort of libertarian conservative hybrid. In a lot of areas, I'm libertarian. In a lot of areas, I'm very conservative.
What are some of your key issues?
Well, I'm very libertarian when it comes to like global issues, right? I don't care what the heck's going on in whatever bumcrap country is going. I don't care what happens in Europe.
So you're fairly isolationist.
I wouldn't say I'm isolationist. I'm definitely leaning more towards that.
You're like interrogating him right now.
Yeah, he's interrogating me right now. He's got a knife to my throat.
So what you're saying is...
So
I just want to get our sides kind of laid out so we can know where we're all coming from.
For example, we have 55,000 troops in Germany right now, right? Stationed in Germany.
Not right now. Trump
reduced that. Trump reduced it by 9,500, and the neocons just went berserk. They're like, what the hell are you doing? You can't remove troops from Germany. Don't you know what they did twice? Whereas I'm like, I could give a crap how many troops we have in Germany. Germany needs to fend for themselves, right? And that goes to my more, again, libertarian conservative ideology of personal responsibility. You gotta take care of yourself.
No more U.S. military health care.
Son, no.
You have to upkeep for yourself.
Exactly. No. Like we have to spend taxpayer money for our troops to be able to have cafeteria food? Heck no. They should go out and hunt. Hunt for their own stuff. That's why we're in Germany. We need to hunt down their food and take it for ourselves.
So are you pretty far right and pretty far libertarian on the political spectrum?
In a lot of ways, yeah. In some other ways, I understand a lot of the arguments made for global trade economy. However, I also recognize that it's a losing argument, because when you have this global free trade stuff, what they label as free trade, when in reality it's just a multi-dimensional trade deal that's made between several different partners, usually large countries or multi-conglomerate corporations. You have a lot of people lose jobs to that, right? And those jobs aren't getting replaced, And I at first I was angry at Donald Trump when he first started talking about it, and I was like, okay, why are you against free trade? But then I started doing my own research into it, and I was like, okay, I can see where he's starting to come from. I can see why so many of the most rich people, right, whether they're on the left or the right, are angry about his decision. It's not really free trade for the workers. It's free trade for lack of a better term, the 1%.
We all know that you'll just swallow whatever Donald Trump says.
No,
don't even try to cover it up.
there will be several times where I disagree.
Of course.
Horribly with Donald Trump. Like, there are a lot of points in time where I get actually angry at him. I'm like, why can't we have someone like Rand Paul or Ted Cruz or freaking, I don't know, whoever else. Thomas Massey, for example. He won his primary, by the way, so good for him. I'm like, but yeah. So very conservative. I do care about the American worker, not in the sense like a syndicalist or communist way, like the workers need to unionize, and get but I do care about...
That's because you don't believe that's best for the worker.
No, I don't think it is at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you unionizing and surrendering a lot of your rights as a worker to a union, that's not good for you as an individual. Like, you need to retain your right. You shouldn't be locked into some sort of, contract where you surrender your freedom of speech. One of my friends, for example, he's required to wear a mask. He works at Fred Meyer's, and they're like, okay, you got to wear a mask. So he wore a mask, and on the mask it says, "Recall Kate Brown." Kate Brown is our governor, and he had someone complain about him. Is this Fred Meyer's stance on Kate Brown? Is this terrible human being? It's like. And so now some union rep is going to go try and talk to him and say, well, you can't wear that sort of mask during, work hours or whatever. So, and I get it, corporations have a limited amount of rights because corporations are people too, in a sense, right? They're made up of people.
They're hiring your time, and therefore they have the authority to
exactly
do that. But anyways, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, so let's move on to Travis. Introduce your... again, try to be more general than Michael here, who likes to go down rabbit trails. Let's just talk about...
You're the king of rabbit trails, Michael.
Talk about your political alignment, the things you're most passionate about, and maybe your Lord and Savior.
All right.
Both of them.
Yeah, rip Jordan Peterson. So, well, again, I'll just go back to when I went to PSU. So there was a period in my life I didn't really believe in anything, and I was basically traumatized into a responsible human being by my experience at Portland State University, and I was trying to make sense of for a long time, how a lot of my friends in high school, I had some of them I had known since elementary school, could come to very extreme opinions, and I thought about that 16 hours a day, and I always thought about it. And over time, I, through finding a lot of intellectual heroes like Jordan Peterson, or I would say people outside contemporary individuals today, Viktor Frankl, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Fyodor Dostoevsky, I basically came to value the power of an individual who seeks to change himself in order to change the world. Mm-hmm. And I would say that that's my real core motivating value. That's my primary issue that I interact in the world. And the way that shapes me and how I interact with other people and other ideologies is I see, for example, during this whole crisis and with BLM, and I see a lot of moderate people going out and say things that are not moderate at all and become the centerpieces of ideologies that they don't even necessarily believe in, and act very horribly on media and in person with other individuals. And what I've tried to do in my discussions with people is to try to steer people away from ideology and away from identity politics, and to really working on their individual ways to change the world. And people think that the only way to change the world right now in one aspect is to shout at the top of their lungs abstract neologism, like demolish the police, which can have 100 different meanings to it. And if you're a cop and you see a post like that, that can really mean something negative for that cop. And so as far as reform goes, you're actually not changing the world, you're making it worse. So what I would have people do is go call your black friends, for God's sake, and see how they're doing. Mm-hmm. And don't shove down their throat things that they should believe. Right. And I'll wait later to talk about a certain issue I was about to go into, but just be a good forthright human being, and start from there, and then you'll begin to see that by doing that you're transforming yourself, you're transforming the people around you, and you're transforming the network that you're connected in, which can have a greater, that network that you've helped transform can help transform other networks. You actually become a valuable individual by doing that. And so that's really my whole spiel.
Very good.
Right there.
Do you know where you are on the political spectrum?
Like, I would say that I'm always fluctuating from the center right between being a little bit more libertarian or a little bit more authoritarian.
Gotcha.
At times.
Very good. And would you say you're more interested and passionate about politics or philosophy or culture?
I mean, I would definitely say, I would say the biggest thing I'm more passionate about is individuals and what they think, and what their worldview is, and that can encompass anything.
All of them, yeah.
So that's.
What about you, Brendan?
So I used to be your classic libertarian.
Taxation is theft.
Taxation is theft. Legalize everything. Less government is better. All people, when they become libertarians, start out as these crazy pseudo-anarchists.
Oh, absolutely. I knew plenty of them growing up in high school.
Exactly. And it's a oversimplistic ideology that's fun to believe in, but is not very practical at all. So I am now what I will term a Bud Light conservative, a Bud Light libertarian, what I would like to term a sophisticated libertarian, but
those don't exist.
I just retook the political alignment test, one of them, I can't remember which one it was, but it put me just barely right and barely libertarian. And I say sophisticated libertarian because I have always, even when I was a crazy libertarian, decided to orient all of my political beliefs around the harm principle, which I believe is the best guiding principle for governance. But I have a more nuanced view of the harm principle now, and what harms society, what harms individuals, is much broader. And so I believe in a lot more unorthodox beliefs in the libertarian conservative community, like universal basic income, big yin yang guy right here. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in politics a lot, have been for, again, my first real intro to politics was also 2008 Barack Obama election. I was younger than you. I was in a church parking lot, and you hear your parents talking about politics, so you don't know anything except what you've heard. And so me and some kid got into an argument about whether Barack Obama or John McCain was better, because my parents were McCain voters and that kid's parents were Obama voters, and we didn't know what we were talking about. I don't even remember what we said, but that was the first time I had ever talked about politics, and I've not stopped talking about politics since. So here we are,
and you
still talking.
You still became a married man.
I know. It was
congratulations.
A miracle.
Yeah, it is a miracle.
If you don't believe in God,
yeah,
there's evidence right there. All right, so we should get back into the race issues going on, but I think since this is probably going to be our first episode actually airing, we should really quickly rehash the difference between saying Black Lives Matter and when we are talking about BLM and such. You want to do that, Travis?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we really should have said this in the beginning, but when I think all of us agree that there is a difference between BLM as an organization and the average opinion of somebody that uses the BLM hashtag. Because when I go on social media or when I interact with people individually, I'll often ask, okay, what do you believe about, so I saw you post defund the police, like how does that manifest itself in the world? And usually people will give me a very moderate view, like I think it should vary by each department, and and I think we should implement this kind of law for police, which really isn't a bad law at all. Like, most police would agree with that. And then I'll ask, how does what you're saying align with BLM's goals? And every time I've asked that, I've never had somebody answer with, well, I think they align pretty well, or I think they don't, because most people who use the BLM hashtag are actually completely unaware, I would say, of what the actual organization wants and what the organization is. Like, to sum it up perfectly, it's a
lot of people don't even know there is an organization.
Yeah,
frankly.
It's like there's, I mean, if you want to know what we're talking about, go to, it's like B4LM, like B and then the number 4LM, and it has the belief statement and it has all the goals for BLM, and as far as like the three main co-founders have outlined.
Right.
And BLM just like summed up perfectly, and this is from the words from the BLM founders, because I've read through the whole. There's two main websites, and I've read through the whole thing, both of them, and I've followed the three BLM co-founders on Twitter and on Facebook, and I've seen many of their interviews that are on YouTube, and I've just been interacting with that movement, and it's very clearly a postmodern neo-Marxist organization.
Yeah.
What that means is they're not nearly as obsessed with reforming society as they are with establishing power for their identity group.
Right. I think I read several articles that were, a lot of people did some digging, and one of the co-founders just explicitly said that her organization, the people who work for her and herself and her fellow co-founders, are Marxists. Just flat out. That's their words, not mine. You know, it's like they are self-identified Marxists, and their real goal as an organization isn't to actually look at a problem and say, okay, here's some ground where we can try and change something for the better. It is a top to bottom reformation that would not just impact, you know, the well-being of the black community here in America, but it would effectively challenge everything that we know about this country. Their goal is to completely and totally abolish not just the police, but the Constitution, our way of government. You know, they want to completely and totally reform it. Exactly what Marx talks about needs to happen for a actual Marxist society to exist. It needs to happen in an industrialized country like America.
This is the part for the left that I think is dangerous for them, is that there are a lot of people saying the quiet part out loud right now, like the people you were just talking about who just said, yeah, we're all Marxists. Ilhan Omar, I believe, said that you can't reform the police department because at its root it is rotten, and the only thing you can do with something that has a rotten root is to rip it up and remake it.
Right.
And they believe that all of America was founded upon racist principles by racist people, and therefore it is systematically racist and systemically racist, and therefore it has to be torn down and rebuilt, which is the Marxist ideology.
Yeah, and yeah, it's really scary when you think about it, because whenever there has been a Marxist revolution in a country, it has always been the frontliners who are advocating and forcing this type of change to happen. They're the first people to be exterminated when that change occurs.
Robespierre.
In Russia, for example, when they had the communist takeover, the Lenin takeover, he pitted peasant against peasant. He had the poorer peasants attack the peasants who were slightly richer than them, and he enjoyed that. He got joy out of watching people kill each other. And when, let's say a Marxist revolution happened in America, the community that would be affected the worst out of anybody would be the black community.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they would be looked at as a detriment to society just because they happen to be the group that pulls in the most welfare money, right? So, and everyone who's on welfare before a Marxist takeover, doesn't matter what color you are, what gender you are, you will be targeted as you're not helping this new Marxist society, you're actually making it worse. And so, you're gone.
The problem with any revolutionary ideology like Marxism is that there has to be an enemy at all times, even when you've abolished the original enemy. This is like in 1984 when there's an invisible nation that they're at war against all the time so that you have dedication to the system. This is what happened in the USSR, that there were always enemies within. I mean, if you watch Death of Stalin, which is obviously satire and a great movie, but those death lists happen every day. There were more Russian citizens who were exterminated by the Russian government because there had to always be enemies of the state. And the revolutionary ideology of Marxism is not the same as like the American Revolution. People will say, this country was founded on revolution, so we need to revolt now to improve the country. The American Revolution was not an ideology of revolution. It was an ideology of individual rights and freedoms and liberties, and there was an actual force, which was the British government, which was suppressing that from coming to fruition. So a very limited revolution had to happen to establish that, but it is not an ideology rooted in revolution.
And so, like just going right off of that, Brendan, I think you can sum up BLM perfectly with how they define racism.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I do want to preface, by the way, I'm not saying that if Black Lives Matter came to ultimate power in the United States, they had unlimited power, that they would automatically commit a mass genocide of people.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to say. But I'm going to look at the word racism and how they define it. And I have a very simple definition of it, which is if I were to discriminate against somebody on the basis of their ethnicity. That's my definition of it. And the way that BLM defines it is racism is only a crime that can be committed by those who are at the top of the hierarchy. So those who are in power are the only ones who can commit racism, i.e. what they see as white people.
Right.
And I've seen most people in BLM say that minorities, however, cannot be racist. Occasionally, I will see somebody who will say, individually, minorities can be racist, but only white people can be, real racist, systemical racist.
Yeah.
And every totalitarian ideology in the 20th century defined the worst crime that they saw that you could commit. So, Marxist, which is, abuse of the lower classes. That's the worst crime you can commit in Marxism. They saw that as a crime that only the people at the top could commit. And that allowed, essentially, for the revolutionaries, who most of them were lower class people. Lenin was from a lower class. Actually, I'm not sure. I know Stalin was from a lower class background.
Lenin was a university student, and I believe graduate. So he was an educated individual. He was definitely, and usually when you see from these sorts of revolutionary types, when they have a concerted, actual power, and they start to gain actual power, usually at the head you have what Aric would describe as an intelligentsia. Someone who can lead the mass of people that are angry about whatever and give them direction and goals. And so you'll have these, almost in a way. Donald Trump is kind of that way, in the sense that he got a bunch of people in the Republican Party to vote for him when he was bashing his own posse. He was bashing the rich. He's like, hey, I've taken advantage of the system because it was legal for me to do so, and it happens every day. But as your president, I'm going to stop that from happening.
Yep.
And people bought that.
Mm-hmm. And so there's that, but I think the most sinister thing about that is you can't commit evil.
Right.
Like, according to BLM, like I look at Facebook and Twitter. Like, right now, I'm not saying this is actually true, but right now, according to most people, like the zeitgeist, like racism is worse than murder in people's minds at this moment. And BLM as an organization cannot commit that crime. It is impossible for them to commit that crime.
Did you see that Merriam-Webster added a second definition to racism
No.
just the other day, like a week ago? They added a second definition that says, a doctrine or political program based on the assumption of racism and designed to execute its principles, or a political or social system founded on racism. And that's coming from the Marxist ideology. The editor of Merriam-Webster came out and said that some college student had been like basically harassing Merriam-Webster with a bunch of emails demanding that they include the fact that racism is committed by those who are at the top of the power hierarchy, which is the Marxist idea that you're talking about.
And it's like, it's a giant game of language.
Yep.
Like I'm an English major, and I had to take literary criticism, and I had to sit through and read like feminist criticism, and I read through LGBT criticism, and there's just this like long list of like acronyms that these ideologies create, how they define the world, and it's just a re-spinning of the story of the world. And in the end, if BLM, the re-spinning of the story for BLM is all the evil in the world is manifested outside the black community in white power. And all the good is within the movement. So the movement cannot commit evil. That means everything the movement does is good.
Which is literally the definition of God. They've made themselves the God over creation.
Well, Brendan, you know that in political science, definitions are everything.
Yeah. Well, the way that human beings conceive and perceptualize the whole world is through language, primarily. And this is again in 1984. What a good book. They have the Department of Language, and Orwell has his whole like new dictionary at the end of the book. It's great. Love Orwell. But I'm going to get into some theology here. The primary way that we are created in the image of God is that we can create and that we have language. And God created everything with language. And with language, we participate in that creation and we manifest that creation as real for ourselves. That's why Adam named the animals, is because those things weren't really real in his conceptual perception until he attributed names to them, which is why the whole game is the language. That's why they're changing the dictionary definition of racism. That's why the name Black Lives Matter of the organization is a semantic overload, to where you say, I don't agree that Black Lives Matter, then you're obviously a racist, because I want to establish all three of us believe Black Lives Matter, obviously, okay? But we don't agree with Black Lives Matter, the organization, but you see how much hoops we have to go through to clarify that, because the whole idea is they want to give this semantic overload to the ideology.
Well, that's the whole battle within the 21st century. Like, honestly, it is a battle of definitions and language. And when you allow people to change definitions, and that gives them complete and total control over the argument, and they can change that definition as quickly as you allow them to. And then they'll change it again. Once you have a grasp of that new definition, they'll make an even newer definition. And so you have to jump even through more hoops. This is the problem with. I like to watch these like Oxford videos of this like debates between students, right? And you have like the Eatons on the other side. It's like just a bunch of like British young men, and they're all got their ties or whatever, and then the women usually are like wearing dresses or whatever. And
how backwards and conservative.
I know, just so weird. But it's interesting because they constantly argue about the definitions of words. Always. It never goes beyond that.
Well, that's because they're British.
Well, and they're debaters.
Here's the thing, though. Most of them aren't British.
Debates are the worst.
They allow other people to come in. It's hilarious, too, because I love watching the Eatons. They usually they're just able to, wedge their way through it, and they kind of do the gangster, glasses drop to the face type thing, the memes. They're really good at roasting people on the debate stage because
with facts and logic.
There is a benefit to allowing a side to control definitions so much that they get in front of themselves and then they trip over themselves and they lose their definitions. However, BLM has done a really good job at changing the definitions and keeping the definitions.
And it's not just BLM. BLM is a product of a very long outcropping of ideology which has contributed to this.
I also just have to mention this one thing, right? Like, Karl Marx, the person who created Marxism.
What? That was who it was?
He was, really racist.
Yeah.
Full on, I believe that this is a quote from him. Again, he wrote in German. He was Prussian, for crying out loud. But he basically said that black people, in a not so nice way of saying black people, were an inferior people that should be kept in Africa. And
there were so many racists in the past who we're not talking about. Because they're
I'm just bringing up the fact that he was a racist because now you're having this movement that calls Black Lives Matter. They call themselves that, and then they also say we are trained Marxists. I'm sorry, but the guy who is your mentor, your ancient mentor, he hated you because of your skin color. Mm-hmm. How ironic is it?
We have to cancel people who are racist, like Christopher Columbus, George Washington, and people who are more racist, way more racist than George Washington, Marx, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, Charles Darwin, who came up with that one thing. I don't remember what it's called. Anyways, Darwinism. Super racist. He's like, black people are less evolved. Oh, okay, that's fine. We're just not going to talk about it.
The nicest thing he ever said was that black people tended to be more physically strong than white people.
Which is just a fact.
And he just said that but white people would win out in the end because they are more intelligent.
Yep, exactly.
And I'm like, okay.
Rough.
And we've been teaching this guy's science, his theories in school for how long?
And it's fine, because if somebody comes up with something valuable, he comes up with a theory that proves to be reliable, then let's use his theory, let's enjoy what he's contributed, and let's not throw away everything that he's given us because he had his faults, which goes for Christopher Columbus, it goes for George Washington.
Yep.
But that's outside the storyline of the movement.
Exactly. It's all about ideology, it's all about narrative.
I do want to say that this isn't the first time that there have been riots because of George Washington. George Washington had to deal with his own riots when he was president of the United States. I do want to point out, there's a lot of people out there that are like, America's never been this bad. It's terrible.
Whiskey Rebellion.
Yeah, we have this country, while it seems really bad right now, and a lot of people are saying, is this a sign of the end times, diving into theology a little bit.
Oh no.
There are things that have happened in this world within the last 100 years that is just way worse.
World War II was beyond anything we could comprehend even today.
Yeah, and I would say, this is the most divided we've been since Vietnam.
Yeah,
Vietnam for sure. The 60s were the closest thing.
I would say the real danger we're in is what we do right now could lead us along a line of events for something very catastrophic to happen in the future.
Yeah.
And going back to the whole language game and redefining of words and creating a new narrative, I'm starting to think that the narrative we allow to become true right now will either become true for everyone 20 years from now, or there will be a very violent reaction against it that neither side wants to see.
Right.
And
Probably both.
What I'm building off of that, what I am really scared about all this stuff is that this is breeding racism, and conservatives will say, well, it's breeding racism on the left side towards white people, and leftists will say that it's breeding racism towards black people. It's both. We in terms of how divided we are now based on race, it hasn't been this bad since the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
We can definitely say that. And what's really strange is that we have a lot of people who are offering solutions who are currently in power, that have been in power, or like they were just getting into power at the end of the 70s usually. And so they were building
Biden.
That
was 84
Biden, something like
president.
that. But these guys have been around for a long time, and they'll say, well, I marched with MLK or Malcolm X or whatever. But what have you been doing for the past
This
years?
is key. That the major cities which are experiencing the most police brutality, the most African American crime, the most police racism, are and have been governed by Democrats for decades at this point.
At least.
Yes, and Nancy Pelosi
Atlanta, Georgia has not had a Republican mayor since 1879.
Wow, it's Georgia. You'd think,
You'd think, right? But it's Atlanta.
it's a long time.
Right?
But this is the point, that they are blaming the system which they have been at the head of for decades. And this is why it's all about narrative. This is why it's not about results. It's because the Senate, I'm sure you guys are aware, just tried to put forth a police reform bill, which would do, conservatively 50% of what the Democrats are calling for, but probably more. And the Democrats voted against even proceeding with debate over the bill. Republicans presented this bill with the ability to be amended and include more of the Democrats' demands, but they rejected it. And then Pelosi is putting forth a police reform bill, which is so extreme in the House, and she's not allowing for any amendments, and therefore it's going to die. So they killed the Republican bill in the Senate, which could have been passed and could have resulted in real change, and they put forth a bill in the House they know is not going to pass, just so they can say Republicans voted no, and then they can run on that in 2020.
That's because during an election year, you never want to get rid of the outrage.
Exactly. But not even during an election year. This has been going on for decades, like you said.
Oh,
it's
I
all
agree.
part of the narrative
I'm
which
just saying that
contributes to their elections.
I'm just saying that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, interestingly, are using a tactic. We can talk about how moral it is to use this tactic for this issue, racial injustice.
Yeah, well, certainly not. I know the tactic,
but the
it's not
tactic is
moral.
the same tactic that Mitch McConnell used for Merrick Garland.
Yeah.
Which was basically, let's let the American people decide. However, he openly said, hey, let's let the American people decide through the election of the president. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer aren't doing that. They're just saying, the Republicans aren't doing enough. We're going to we have the bill that's going to solve all your problems. Mm-hmm. But in reality, it's this radical, extreme bill that probably would make things worse.
This is something...
Okay,
Go ahead.
So then this comes to at the most abstract level. It's why do we disagree with BLM as an organization?
Right.
Because we actually believe that BLM would destroy the black community if they came to power.
Absolutely.
And I've come to this decision because I've read through their policies and I've read through they want to do, and it's very interesting to me because BLM will happily call for the destruction of the transatlantic trade agreement,
right?
But in a very abstract way, with no way of actually any plans of laying that out.
Yeah.
But is perfectly willing to lay out details for how disrupting the notion of the Western nuclear family and calling that an imperialist concept. And here's how that would destroy the community. You want to know how to screw a community financially? You make every couple get a divorce.
Yep.
It's the number one correlation between poverty in a family.
Yep.
Is between it's divorce and poverty. And there's an 80% divorce rate in the black community. There's also outside 50% of over 50% of children are born outside of wedlock.
I saw a statistic, I don't remember the source, that said that only 2% of people who graduate high school, get a job, and don't have a kid out of wedlock will end up in permanent poverty.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, BLM, like, doesn't actually address that. Instead, it says, like, we need to look outside our communities and find salvation and a social revolution. It's like, actually, like, salvation starts, like, within the community and finding out what are some things that we could do. And it's hard to say that because the automatic response, you know, I'm actually going to bring up a point which I wanted to get into earlier, but I didn't. The automatic response I get is, you're morally condemning the black community with your statement. And that's not what I'm saying. And the people who usually tell that to me, this is very interesting. Whenever I speak with an African American individual, whether in BLM or not in BLM, I have had a civil discussion.
Yeah.
I have never had an angry discussion with a black individual despite their ideology during the last 2 months. It has always been civil. The only people who have ever called me racist have been white people within BLM.
Yeah.
Like, and they speak to me as if, like, the issues that I'm talking about, like, would systemically destroy the black community, and they assume which is quite racist, they assume that every African American individual believes the same thing and advocates for BLM's goals.
This is
wrong.
This is a result of the terrible ideology of white guilt that has overcome the kind of leftist racial ideology where white people have been shamed into accepting the crimes of their ancestors of slavery and discrimination and racism, which obviously happened and were obviously terrible, but which none of these young, crazed white people have participated in. And so, to alleviate their white guilt, they have established their white superiority by becoming a white savior and adopting a white savior complex, saying that only they can save black people. Only they can make the situation of people of color better in America by shirking off the system and by disassociating with their ancestors and with the systems which their ancestors established.
Yeah, they're Uncle Toms, and they're flat out racist. Like, the most racist people I have met have been white people within BLM.
Yeah,
hands down.
Yeah,
and like,
well, I just saw a video. This was from the recent protests or whatever you want to call them in DC, and there was just this white college girl who was actually, like, yelling at two black cops.
Oh, yeah.
She was attacking a fellow cop who was white, and he was on the phone with his black wife, and she was calling him a racist. And he's on the phone, and he's trying to argue back at her. It's interesting that there are now a lot of cops that are now engaging in dialogue, but it's not like, they're angry back at, these people that are accusing them of all this stuff. And two of his fellow cops who are black, they step in front of him and start yelling at this white girl, and she is completely ignoring them. She sometimes goes back and forth with them, but she's got this mentality that it's like, no, you poor black person, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to speak on your behalf against this other evil white person. Because I'm an evil white person, so I need to talk. And I need to do this because it's my problem as much as it's that person's problem, but let me do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it just made me sick to my stomach because I think that is probably the most violent, not violent, excuse me, but like just vile racism I've seen since like the civil rights marches when people were getting sprayed with hoses.
It is white people trying to absolve their white guilt, which is misplaced because they are not guilty. They're people of their race have committed crimes, and we should try to resolve the injustices that are results of those crimes, but they are not guilty. And so they are trying to resolve this guilt by reestablishing white superiority, where you, a black person, are still inferior to me on this issue because I have the correct ideology and I have shirked the system.
It also goes,
I am doing my virtue and my
It also
duty.
goes to show, like, I don't want to talk about the voter ID issue so much, but some person was going around asking white college students, what do you think about voter ID laws? Oh, they're racist. Why are they racist? Well, because the black community is so illiterate that they can't get themselves their own, they don't have the resources available to them to be able to get a voter ID. And then this guy goes to Harlem, it was like New York University or something. I can't remember which university it was, but it was within New York. And then he goes to Harlem and he starts talking to black people on the street. He's like, hey, do you think that it would be okay if you had to show your ID before you voted? And they're like, yeah. And then he starts asking more questions. Would it be difficult for you to get an ID, like at the DMV or whatever? And they're like, no, I have my driver's license and it'd be super easy for me to go get another thing. And then he tells them, would you,
black
yeah,
people.
exactly. Which is, it's white man's
white savior complex.
It's not even white savior's complex as much as it's white man's burden.
You know what?
Yeah.
You know what? I might have a recorded discussion with a BLM activist pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
At least somebody that uses the hashtag, who doesn't identify with the organization, by the way.
Okay.
And I actually told him, we were in a text exchange, I said, BLM has actually made me believe in white privilege.
Yeah.
Because the most arrogant people I've encountered over the past month have been white people within BLM with the savior complex.
Absolutely.
And thinking that it's their ideology, it's their ideas that are going to uplift the black community.
That
have treated people like Ben Carson or other conservative, or just not even conservative blacks, just people that don't identify with BLM as either two things, either somebody who is lost or a race traitor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Which is, it's just gross.
I think it was Condoleezza Rice who calls this situation the soft bigotry of low expectations, which is that these white liberals believe that black people are incapable of rising above the system,
Right.
and therefore they have to do it. And what kind of bigotry is that to believe that a whole race of people are incapable of bettering themselves, and that you have to do it for them, and that we can't expect black people or people of color to not riot or to, not divorce, not live in poverty, but that we need to just solve this for them. Which, again, I don't want to, this is a touchy issue, I want to clarify myself. I believe that white people have committed serious crimes against people of color in the past, that's obvious, and that there are effects of those crimes which linger today, which is also obvious. And that we should be working in tandem with people of color to better their situation and to resolve the effects of those crimes against people of color.
Much like how the civil rights movement happened, right?
Yes, but exactly how the civil rights movement
the same
happened.
way that MLK worked with Billy Graham.
Yeah.
Right? Billy Graham, a lot of people, there's a lot of focus put on the MLK Jr., rightfully so. But I think there also needs to be, a lot of footnotes and a lot of mentions of Billy Graham during that time. He went throughout the South. He changed the culture of the South. in a huge way, because it used to be, bumpkin territory, and you were racist if you were from the South. There was a huge racism problem because of Jim Crow laws and all this other stuff. He went down. Billy Graham did. He went down to the South in tandem with MLK Jr. and he told his fellow white man that it is a sin for you to be racist, and here's why. And here's all the Bible passages that say, this is an issue. Say Moses, for example, married a woman from Canaan, Zipporah, right? She was not a Jew, nor an Egyptian. And when Moses returns to Egypt to fulfill God's will, and he meets up with his sister, and his sister kind of bashes Zipporah for not being a Jew, I believe God curses Moses' sister with the inability to speak. Because she was basically saying, you're not a Jew. What mattered was that Zipporah was a follower of God.
Yeah.
Right? That's what mattered. Because when God, a lot of people in the South back then, and even, the KKK will say, well, God doesn't want us to intermarry or whatever. He doesn't want us to meander with foreign folk. When God says foreign, he's talking about foreign to him, people that don't know him, people who have rejected him. But the people of Israel were supposed to be priests unto the world, right? That means bringing people in to follow God. And so Billy Graham went down the South with this message saying, see, God says that you're not supposed to judge people by their skin color. It matters about what's in your heart. And yes, if you are a Christ-fearing man or woman, you are brother and sister with a black person who also believes in Christ.
Yeah, and so
you are wrong to not like that. That should be a good thing, a unifying thing. Christ unifies all, no matter what.
And that is why I identify as colorblind.
Yeah, exactly.
Controversial enough. Amazingly though, if I said that 10 years ago, I would have been online with
praised.
I would have been praised.
Oh, yeah.
But now, all of this, it's like a 10-year difference. It's like you are a deplorable human being if you say that. And what colorblind means, at least to me, and what most people think it is now, is just really a cliche.
Yeah.
People don't really understand it.
Yeah.
What it means for me is I treat each individual as an individual, and I don't preconceive notions about that person because of their background. It's like if I meet an African American individual from Detroit, I don't assume that they believe themselves to be somebody who is a victim of systemic racism.
Yeah.
If I actually do that, I actually think I would be being racist.
If you preconceive anything about a person because of their color, that is an act of racism.
Right.
And that is the issue with the greater intersectional ideology, which is dominating this racial ideology of BLM.
Which is why I'm really worried that that's why we're spending so much time talking about white people in the BLM movement, is because unfortunately what all this media coverage on BLM and assigning Black Lives Matter to all of these protesters who happen to be black but aren't necessarily involved with BLM as an organization, that's associating, the media is indirectly or even sometimes directly associating black people with the BLM movement, all black people with the BLM movement. And then when, Antifa or whatever comes out and you see the riots happen, that makes people, your average grillers, people who really don't care much about politics but are now paying attention. Grillers is an actual political term these days. Basically, center-right individuals that will only vote for the president. And it's basically they'll vote for whoever think will lower their taxes and
taxation is theft
and leave them alone, right? So average grillers are probably the biggest block of voters in this country.
No, they're not. No, I don't believe that at all.
But the thing is that most of the time they won't even participate in an election.
Well, yeah.
Especially in midterm elections, they don't
Voter
care.
turnout is egregious in America.
Oh, it's terrible. But that's getting away from the point. The point is that you are now convincing a lot of people indirectly that there is an association with skin color and ideology. Therefore, you are now breeding racism. You are creating more racism in your apparent fight against racism. You are creating more of it. Because in a way, in a very sick, twisted way, which is extremely sad, you are convincing people that there is reason to be afraid. Because you are assigning all black people with the BLM movement, with the rioters, and therefore, all of a sudden, every black person is now a threat to you because all of a sudden they could just lose their mind and start rioting. Which is terrible. And if you are predisposed to think that way, yes, you have a problem with racism. You shouldn't let the media drive you that way. But there is also, that the issue with BLM and the media at large, that they are partially responsible for breeding more racism. And it's really difficult for me to think that they can't see that. Some of them, it just outright they are wanting white people to admit their racism, that white guilt thing, right? Get on your knees and kneel before me because my ancestors had to kneel before you for 400 years, so you got to do it for like a day or whatever. But in reality, they want it longer. These BLM activists, these Antifa activists.
And so that kind of brings up what a really good response to all this is. Mm-hmm. And I know personally the way I've tried to give a response, and I've seen you two do it, I've seen quite a few people I know do this, thankfully, is don't participate in the things that are making the world worse.
Right.
Don't use words the same way that the common ideology is using them. So I don't say Black Lives Matter. And it's funny because people will, I've been asked before to say, it's like, just say it. Just say Black Lives Matter, because that's all the movement is. And then I said, the individual worth of an African American individual is inherently valuable.
Yeah.
It was something along those lines. That person got mad at me.
Yeah.
But that's essentially what I said. I said, like,
people,
Black Lives
regardless
Matter.
of their skin color,
It's because of
value equally.
we have entered into a period of time where people are more tribal, right? And people and it's a driving force of ideology is to be a part of a group, and it's in our DNA to try and find a tribe to exist with, right? And so naturally these people, they want to belong, and they want as many people to belong with them as well. But anyone who doesn't belong is a threat to the tribe. And so, before we could just let bygones be bygones and be like, okay, whatever, we disagree, see you later. But people are more angry these days.
What I think is very fascinating is how shortly lived the postmodern ideology existed in the leftist mainstream ideology. That only 10 years ago, every leftist had a tolerance and a coexist bumper sticker on their Prius back in the good old days. And, it was all about, you believe this way, they believe this way, I believe this way, and we're all supposed to coexist, right? And for some reason, all the people on the right got really mad at that, because of course, people on the right get mad at anything that the left does. And anyways, we've gone from that extreme all the way to not only do you have to believe one thing that is objectively true and that you must abide by, but you must believe something and you must hold opinions based on your race. And all people who have this race, or all people who have this sexual orientation, are this, must believe this. And if you're not, you're a traitor to your group.
Right. For example, Dave Rubin, who's a gay conservative fellow podcaster, I suppose. He has his own
We're
like
not
show.
in his league.
We're on his level.
Well,
Yeah.
ideologically, I think you and him are actually fairly similar.
Oh yes, we are.
We're gonna invite him pretty soon.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. But Dave Rubin, he said it is more frightening for someone to come out as a conservative to their liberal parents, to their leftist parents, than it is for a gay person to come out to their conservative parents. Now that's conjecture, that's a joke, but and he's speaking as a gay conservative.
And that again is making assumptions of all gay people and all conservatives.
Right, exactly,
But okay.
exactly. But there is some truth to that, right?
Yeah.
Not every situation is the same.
In
But-
popular culture, that certainly.
In popular culture, absolutely. But and the merit there is that there is this growing animosity between the ideologies.
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads me to like the concluding point I was getting at is Black Lives Matter doesn't mean quote unquote Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
It very clearly means an ideological point.
Many ideological points.
Yeah.
And I've been encouraging people to, first of all, I've just been listening to people.
Yeah.
That's been the first thing I've done. And I try not to tell people, stop using the BLM hashtag. I made that mistake in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I've been reproached for that, and I was wrong. But now I say, I try to encourage people to value certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you as an individual, you have so much worth within you. You have so much potential to change the world. But none of that potential comes within an ideology that is centered on identity. Your self-worth is not centered within who you are as a person, or what your identity is, your ethnicity, your gender.
Right.
And it's found in your character and how you live your character out in the world. And that's far more of an important thing. I think that's a very transformative thing right there. It's a very positive thing. It's much more thank God your self-worth isn't defined by your ethnicity. That's freaking good news, because we would be screwed if that was the case.
Yeah.
And that goes back to that self-bigotry of low expectations things. Imagine if someone told you that you were doomed to fail and you could never succeed, you could never grow, because the system is out to get you and your group, and there's nothing you can do. It's the same issue, it's the same kind of ideology that is the participation trophy ideology, the ideology that says, you are already good. You are, as you are, celebratory. And you're not. People have natural emotions of guilt, natural emotions of shame, natural emotions of needing to improve. And that has been shamed by a whole generation of parents who think those things are painful and therefore they're bad. But that is the inherent human nature, which is to strive and to become better. And African Americans, as well as anyone, are capable of improving themselves, of improving their situation, and to tell them otherwise is racist and is your white privilege and your white superiority.
We believe in white privilege.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've been convinced by white people.
Yes. Exerting their obnoxious white privilege.
Absolutely. That kind of leads me into my next big topic that I want to talk about, which is just this idea of cultural change. Government doesn't do much, right? Besides the day-to-day taking care of the status quo, making sure that people are unaffected of foreign invasion or whatever, the last big change that happened in this country, in terms of meaningful change, was the aftermath of 9/11 with the Patriot Act. that fundamentally changed how data was collected and analyzed by the government.
What do you mean the last big change?
Okay, so when I talk about big change, I'm talking about cultural change. When 9/11 happened, there became this uneasiness in the population, being wary of everybody, right? I don't know if you guys noticed it, but I definitely noticed it. And when I talked to my parents and my older cousins and others, I was 6 years old when it happened.
6 years old.
I remember when it happened, and I remember seeing it on the television. My
Yeah.
parents told me it was an earthquake, to try and make me not so scared.
Yikes.
But yeah, there was definitely just this people became more afraid, right? And that was more an effect of the attack itself. But that cultural shift allowed for the government to make substantial change in terms of personal freedoms, restricting personal freedoms, without us even really noticing it. Before that, the last great, accomplishment of government was the Civil Rights Act, and that
Which
was
is
based
an
off
accomplishment of government.
No,
That was
that was a
accomplishment of
response
the
to
Civil
a
Rights
cultural
movement, yeah.
revolution. Cultural revolution.
Politics has always been downstream of culture. Because
Absolutely.
politicians are inherently interested primarily in their re-election, and so they will adapt to endorse the popular ideologies of their constituents.
Right.
Which is why the people who have been in power, like Joe Biden, over so long, are now complaining about issues which they've done nothing to solve their whole time. Joe Biden passes the crime bill, and
one of the most
Now-
literally nationalizes without people realizing it, and the Republicans at the time too didn't realize this either, and they should have. Was that Joe Biden's? It wasn't just Joe Biden, but
No.
he's the person who's running for president, and he was integral in this
Yes.
passage of and creation of this legislation. It really was a nationalization of a lot of non-segregation Jim Crow laws.
there's a lot of institutional imprisonment.
Exactly.
Um,
It was terrible.
yeah, I wouldn't say it was terrible. But
I think it was because you are literally handing out death sentences to someone who is in possession of like half an ounce of.
it was extremely problematic. But the point is that he did that because that's what he deemed as popular then.
Yeah.
And now he has to run away from that because it is very unpopular now. And so the culture is going to direct what the government does, which is why the civil rights movement was successful, is because it was just a very powerful cultural force. The issue today is that you can have very powerful cultural movements that are only pushed by a very, very small minority because their voices can be so amplified by technology and Twitter and the likes that the most vocal and the most outrageous people in the country can get a platform and can push the cultural movement, which will affect
I want to
politics.
say culture today, because of social media, becomes so watered down and just exposed that it has no value. And I think that you've seen that in Hollywood as well, as just in general, the big moneymakers of film and of TV, they've just kind of gone with the flow of culture rather than defining culture.
Well, that's because they're no longer the primary voice that everyone hears.
Right.
Now everyone has a platform.
Since social media, yeah.
Yep.
And since social media, you've also seen a lot of people become more angry, just in general.
Everyone thinks that their opinion matters a whole lot.
It's weird because I used to think that it's people who are political on social media, they're just frustrated in life and they don't realize that they don't really have a big impact. And then my opinion changed when COVID-19 hit.
Oh man.
Because I watched social media. I watched people delete their accounts, like say I'm getting off for a while, like how can like an app like Facebook like create so much literal suffering in somebody's life that they have to look away from their phone?
They have to delete the app.
You know,
they have to run away.
It's because they're being exposed to a lot of negativity.
Yeah, and so like all the time when your feed is just 24 hours a day, like the world is terrible, the world is a horrible place, like we're all gonna die in 20 years anyway, no matter what, because of climate change. Nothing matters.
And
it's
you
like,
can't look away.
It's like that's all you see, and so like
You're forced to stare into your own demise.
And so instead of doing that, what I've tried to do recently, I've been posting a lot more recently, and I've discovered that what you just talked about with culture, that a lot of culture today is defined on social media platforms.
Yeah.
And I've tried to be a culture creator or definer by posting on my own media and posting in a way that is sometimes highly critical of a very specific aspect in individuals, like intolerance, for example.
That's part of what inspired me to start this podcast, to reach out to you guys. It's because I got sick and tired of just seeing the same old on social media and expressing myself through that. This is doing this in this format. Is way more constructive, I think, at least personally. Actually talking rather than typing, getting human interaction.
I bet if you polled the population who is active on social media and you asked them, have you had one single constructive debate on social media about politics where you or the other person have changed your mind in any significant way? 0% of conversations are actually helpful. So all we're doing, and then the algorithms are going to promote the people who you comment on their posts and they comment on your posts, and you only do that if you disagree. So now you just see only disagreeing opinions. Now people are only arguing in the most, and people say outlandish things they would never say to your face
and
on social media.
And don't forget, if you approach them with logic, or even with love, Christ-like love, and you say, but you still hold your ground in what you believe, they will remove you. They will block you. I have been blocked by people. I've also had to block other people, unfortunately, because they look for fights on social media, and I say, okay, I know what you're going to do and how we would interact online, so I'm going to have to just block you out. Travis, you've had people block you.
The first person that blocked me, it was really, like, completely baffled me when it happened, because like I've been friend on Facebook with this person for like 4 years, and like I've enjoyed 98% of it. He was a pretty frequent poster. Like I enjoyed 98% of the content that he posted. Like he was generally a very funny guy, very sarcastic, really cool guy in person, very talented man, and he just comments on one of my posts. He's like, I'm tired of seeing your post. And it baffled me because, and that made me, I've been thinking about that for about a month now, and this would be a really interesting study. I have a theory that social media allows people to become the avatars of ideological ideas without any consequences.
Yeah.
And I think Twitter is actually the worst because it's funny. I'm going to use Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, in his most recent post, he called Twitter like basically the sole reason why Twitter exists is so that people can mob other people on social media and to just level them. And I've seen that happen with you guys specifically. And I'm not a fan of it, but I think it's pretty interesting. Like you see people like they literally become the avatars of ideas.
It's interesting. if you were to look at the last British election, where the Conservatives there absolutely destroyed the left and completely and totally took absolute control of the government because of the way the British Parliament works. They just overwhelmingly dominated in the polls.
They elected Trump number 2, by the way.
Basically, if Trump were British and more literate, you have Boris Johnson.
A little more clever and somehow even worse hair than Donald Trump.
Yeah, which
somehow
blows my mind. But the point is that if you were to just look at the British Twitter mob, and you were to compare, likes and retweets from the Labour leader, who's the leftist party, versus that of Boris Johnson, who represented the Conservatives, you would think that Twitter trends showed that Corbyn, the Labour Party, were reaching more people. But the exact opposite happened. And there was this culture, there was a shock that went through.
It's 2016.
It was worse than 2016 for these British people.
Yeah.
They were like, how could this actually happen? Because they're stuck in this bubble and they think we are the majority because of that mob mentality, and they're not experiencing anything else. They're not going out for a walk and going to the pub and seeing all of the British grillers, the pubbers, or the North or whatever. I pay attention to more British politics than you do, for sure.
But you don't care what happens in Europe.
I don't care what happens in Europe, but I still find it fascinating.
It is funny. It's great.
And it's interesting to see how trends can repeat themselves across the ocean.
Politics is more fun to watch when it doesn't
affect
you as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure that if I were a British person, I would be completely and totally embarrassed by the way that the Parliament acts a lot, how it's basically a roast session.
It's amazing.
But as an American, I find it absolutely hilarious that these people who once ruled, the world, are now just roasting each other in this grand palace. And that's their job.
Yeah.
They have no Navy, no Air Force.
They're
reduced to a pitiful state of Facebook arguments manifested in parliamentary discussion.
Basically, yes.
Used to own the whole world, now own Little Island.
I find it all fascinating how the leftist mob on Twitter was so confused that they lost because they felt like they were in the majority when the Conservatives won in Britain. And then they actually got creamed.
And somehow the media has chosen Twitter as an authoritative source to go to, where they will print tweets in all their news articles, even though it is in no way representative of the American population. Right. Not in age, probably not even in race, not in ideology.
Absolutely not, no.
Yeah, I don't think in any way. And yet that's like the authoritative source. I think that we were never made to be this connected. And now we're in kind of a Tower of Babel scenario where we built something too big that it's just going to crumble. And that's why everyone is now fleeing.
That means
the internet.
If this is a Tower of Babel moment, that means that there's going to be a little bit of a crushing coming up.
Well, there will, and that's pretty much. I mean, if you look at it, there's no way to think that there's going to be a happy ending.
If humanity doesn't regulate itself, God comes in and says, "What did I tell you?"
Humanity has never been good at regulating itself.
Of course not. Of course not. That's not I'm just making a joke.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not gonna dive into that heresy. Humans need to build the kingdom, not for God, not for
Which is precisely why the Marxist utopian ideology is impossible.
No. So yeah, we've got a little bit of time left. So I don't know. Let's talk about something more fun. Let's talk about, this is a little bit old news, but Star Wars is effectively done in terms of the Skywalker trilogy.
Oh no.
And people who know me know my opinions on the sequel trilogy, or as I call it, the Disney trilogy, because I don't look at it as canon. It's
Disney
just,
spin-off.
yeah, the Disney
Spin-off, yeah, there you
Bob Iger's little wet dream that is just the worst thing in the world.
Yeah,
He really didn't care as long as it got him his billions back that he spent on the dumb thing. So I have to ask you, Travis. How do you think the sequel trilogy was? Did you like how it ended? What's your whole take on it?
When the first one came out, I wasn't really too disappointed by it.
Same.
It was all right.
It was a nostalgia fest, man. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
so joyous in that theater. Everyone was happy,
Mhm.
ecstatic.
And I gave it a B-. I was like, that's not a horrible film.
You obviously copied somebody else's
It was
test,
completely
but you
unoriginal.
answered enough questions incorrectly that I decided to count it.
It just made you happy.
Yeah,
That's all.
it made me happy, and that was it. And then I showed up for the fifth one. And I got to the scene where,
Eighth, you mean?
Oh my gosh, that's how much I don't care about it anyway.
Yeah.
The eighth film, and
It was awful.
I just see Princess Leia floating in outer space.
And force herself back.
Hold on. And then I'm like, that's a very epic way for a very epic character to go out. This is perfect. She's dead. She's gone.
Especially
Okay.
since she was dead in real
Yeah,
life.
Carrie Fisher
And
had
then-
passed away.
Yeah.
And then, as soon as she started to force her way
Open her
into a
eyes.
ship, I said, the movie was gone.
It was
I knew everything that came after. I think.
I'm so glad that was the moment.
Yeah.
Because that was the moment for me too. I was like,
that's when
There's no
every
redeeming
Star
this.
Wars fan that was in the theaters watched that and
Yeah.
was like, this is going to be a piece of crap.
For me, it was really sucky because I went into episode 8 with the highest of expectations,
ugh.
which was the absolute worst thing to do because it just left me rock bottom.
It was probably worse
when
than
I
any of the
knew
prequels.
there was something off with this film. It was when Poe Dameron at the very beginning basically does the phone call with General Hux and says, "Your mom, this is a message for your mother."
Oh, gross.
And it's
I don't remember that.
It was like, okay, hold on. This is like Marvel humor in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, welcome to Disney. It's all gonna be the same.
And so I started to get a little worried.
Ambitious
And
crossover.
yeah. And that was the first time I ever left a movie theater angry at the film. I'm usually, I don't go to the movie theater very often. I usually know ahead of time what a movie's going to be like when I go to watch it. But not with Star Wars. With Star Wars, I wanted to go in clean and know, I just wanted to be excited for Star Wars.
Yep.
And
Disappointments
it
abound.
it really disappointed me.
There was the pink-haired general who you thought was going to be bad, but then was actually a feminist hero.
Mhm.
And then there was Luke forcing himself to death. He just disappeared after making a hologram of himself.
Which I found hilarious that Rian Johnson was like, this is an original force power. No one has ever thought of this force power before. And lo and behold, in the late 80s, they created a Luke Skywalker comic book where Luke was not only able to force project himself halfway across the galaxy to a different planet without any effort, but then was able to physically transport himself there.
Oh no.
That took a little bit more effort, but it didn't kill him.
No.
Right? So it's like, okay, this isn't an original idea. But anyway, I want to hear what, Travis, you had to say about episode 9.
Well,
Because we can all agree episode 8 was just crap.
that was by far that was the worst Star Wars film ever made.
Yeah.
Ever.
Even worse than the Christmas special.
Then episode 9 came around, and I don't have a lot to say, but I gave it, if episode 8 was an F quadruple minus, I gave episode 9 like a D plus or a C minus, because I felt like they kind of came back and they redeemed some aspects of that story.
Abrams had very little to work with in 9 after his main villain was killed. His original characters were all dead, except for the one who was dead in real life and couldn't actually play her character.
And the extra character that was
That was useless.
Here's what's funny, South Park actually made an episode. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
No.
But
I haven't watched South Park in a
people
long
were
time.
essentially the United States was freaking out that episode 8 was such a horrible film, and then the United States turned to their Lord and Savior like J.J. Abrams.
Oh
and
my
were like,
gosh.
please fix this, please. And like a hero, he accepts, but like
What is
we
he gonna do?
we gave him like a steaming pile of
We gave him a
human
stick
fecal matter
to reconquer the Holy Land.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
and he could only do so much with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. He
I think it was better than like a D minus, man. I
I
gotta give
thought-
it at least a C, maybe a C plus, maybe even a B minus.
episode 9 for me. I went into it with the lowest of expectations.
Yeah, that's
Like,
exactly
episode 8, my
probably
expectations
why
were-
it
Yeah.
was.
I was like, okay, I know J.J. Abrams is coming back, but he is not gonna fix a lot of the problems.
Yep.
A lot of people have a problem with episode 9 bashing episode 8, almost either indirectly or directly.
Yeah.
I like it because I hate
Yeah.
episode 8, and so when you have two movie directors in a trilogy bashing each other, I think it's just funny. It detracts from the value of the film itself, but
It's meta.
it's meta. It's hilarious. Like when Rey throws the lightsaber in episode 9, Anakin's lightsaber, into the fire of the fire of whatever she's burning at that point in time, and then Luke's Force Ghost comes out, grabs the lightsaber, and says, you need to treat this thing with respect." It's like that's an immediate bash of what Rian Johnson did in episode 8 with Luke just throwing the lightsaber over his back and almost into the ocean. So yeah, we're all three of us. I'm surprised actually. All three of us were like, okay, episode 7 was good. It got us hyped for it, and then episode 8 was the biggest disappointment, and then episode 9 was
A tolerable saving
Yeah,
of Ryan Johnson's mess.
yeah. I'd say I watched episode 9 with my brothers and my dad, and it was just fun until the very end where Rey was like, "I am the Jedi," and all of a sudden she has two lightsabers together. And that somehow kills Palpatine. Like, this is reminding me a lot of episode 3 when he was like getting all crisped up and burned by Mace Windu deflecting the lightning. Why wouldn't he just stop doing the lightning?
This is his worst nightmare.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's not good. I can't stop myself. Like, I don't get it.
Maybe it's because he was so shocked by the lightning.
Oh,
He was stunned,
shut up.
and then he just couldn't stop.
No.
He was just kind of like
that's not how
seizuring.
that's not how
lightning
that works.
seizure.
No.
Then he started foaming in the mouth a little bit, and then he died.
No.
Oh, boy.
You know what? I'm just gonna leave this off with I don't think he's dead.
Yeah, because he obviously
Shut up,
can't die
Michael.
again.
No, I don't think he's dead.
What's
wanna-
with Sith
we don't wanna
Lords
bring this back, okay?
Surviving falls. Darth Maul survived his fall when he got cut
Here's
in
the thing,
half.
right? So
Darth Sidious, a senior citizen with a handicap permit on his spaceship, falls down an endless shaft, lightning himself, and survives. Whatever. Okay.
No. You have to listen. The reason why he's
I don't
alive-
want a real answer. Don't give me some nerd answer.
No, here it is.
All
Here
right.
it is. Okay, he stole the power from
No,
Rey.
stop.
Right? No,
Oh,
listen.
okay.
He stole the power from Rey. Right, and one of the powers from Rey and Kylo Ren was that they were able to transport, right, through the Force. They were able to transport to each other's locations. So now all of a sudden, Palpatine, he's gonna fake his death, make it look like he's exploding, but in reality, he's just teleporting to Disney headquarters so that he can kill Bob Iger and
There you
Kathleen
go.
Kennedy, and so I am the Disney.
For ruining
Yes.
ruining this
No,
series.
but
I am the Disney
100%.
draws the
They-
mouse ears.
If they made an episode 10, they could absolutely say, yeah, Palpatine didn't die.
Well, hopefully that
Which I hope
Yeah,
that they
let's
don't
just
do,
never make it.
but I think that it could absolutely happen. They could absolutely because he melted away and then exploded. That's not an on-screen death. An on-screen death is Count Dooku, right? You slice his head off and it rolls on the ground.
That's what she should have done with those two lightsabers.
Yeah, but she didn't do that.
But that's less epic. That's the big problem with 3, is that everyone says that it has awesome fight scenes, but they're over so quick, and they could be way
You
better.
know what would have been super cool is if you brought back
If we
Anakin's
remade the
Force Ghost.
prequels.
Oh yeah, no, don't do that.
Remake the prequels.
You think that remaking
That's my
prequels
campaign.
with Disney's track record with Star Wars would be a good idea?
I think that we should remake the prequels, and we should get somebody who's
No.
responsible in charge of
No,
it.
stick to politics. You're bad.
Could be way
you're bad at
better.
entertainment.
Could be way better. How much time do we have left?
I think we're nearing the end here. Travis, if there was one more thing you wanted to say.
I'll just say to the people listening, you may be a worthless son of a bitch right now. You could be a hero. And that's my closing comment.
That's your closing comment. Well, I want to close off like our good friends at VeggieTales. You know,
What?
They'll say, God made you special, and He loves you very much.